Good afternoon, everyone. My name is van der Walt. I'm the Senior Manager for Innovation Systems and Collections at Rhodes University Library, and this afternoon I'm going to talk about scholarly integrity. This is mostly focused on postgrads, but I think it comes in obviously very handy at the undergrad level as well. So you're more than welcome to ask questions, interrupt, ask, etc. What is more important? I'm going to skip the abstract, but what is very important is to ask the question is what exactly is scholarly integrity? What do we mean by this? The word integrity alone talks about honesty in your endeavors, and specifically when we talk about research integrity, it focuses on research. Whether you do an essay, whether you do a thesis, etc., it's all the same. Obviously, as you go higher into your academic career, this becomes more important, and I will explain why. So the focus of this afternoon session, first of all, is citation management. The second part of this will be questionable science, and the third one will be artificial intelligence in research and how to deal with this, because this is critical. So those are the three main topics. I'm not going to go do all the aspects of research integrity. I think you've also have a lot of other people talking about this topic to some extent. So first of all, to understand that scholarly integrity is key to the whole scholarly ecosystem. The scholarly ecosystem consists of many stakeholders, but what is really, really important is to understand that why are you actually doing research? If you are doing research to get a degree, that's not probably very fine. But what you really want is the research to really transform our society and make an absolute change to where we are. In order to do this, you have to follow a very specific route. And this route specifically talks about honesty at all levels, all steps within your research process. However, knowing humans, this is what happens. We take shortcuts. This is human nature. Unfortunately, when it comes to research, there are no shortcuts. When you write an essay, when you write a thesis, when you do research, when you write an article, never ever take a shortcut. That's the quickest way to disaster. And it can ruin your reputation, it can ruin the institution's reputation, and I will talk about that as well, the impact going forward. I just want to point out from the start, we have this really, really great lip guide on scholarly communication, which includes aspects of research integrity. Please have a look at it. There's many things on this lip guide that will be relevant to your research process, including academic publishing, including things like open access, transformative agreements, etc. Now, that might make a bit more sense when you get to a point where you actually want to publish your research outputs. So, the bottom line, academic integrity really speaks to taking responsibility for your own work, to accurately conduct yourself and to report your research findings, and not to falsify any findings, but to be objective and to be honest in terms of your findings. It also speaks to avoiding certain behaviors, especially when it comes to bias, information bias. And we all have this by default. And what is unfortunate with the current environment in which we find ourselves in is that what is not online sort of doesn't exist often in people's minds. Now, the problem with this is that your knowledge corpus does not just constitute what's electronically available. There's a lot of material that's not available electronically. And the fact is that it's only the electronic materials that's really influencing the technologies in terms of how it's designed and the results it provides. So always go back and do a thorough search across all formats. Do not limit yourself to what you see online. And also the other part of this, because most of the research that's available online stems from European countries, is immediately already a bias in terms of what hasn't been published or what's not published in mainstream research from your southern counterparts like Africa or South America. And there's incredible research being conducted, relevant research in those areas. Academic integrity, you've got to acknowledge where information is coming from. And you've got to use information appropriately. And I'll talk a bit more about information as well just now. You have to act ethically. Your reputation depends on it. But it's not just your reputation. It's also the institutional reputation. So you have to ask yourself, as students, what is your reputation worth to you? Is it worth handing or doing something half-heartedly, an essay, for instance, that you have to submit as part of your whether it's undergrad or postgrad studies? You do it half-heartedly, you take what's there, what you see, you take the first listings on a Google search, and you only use those, you only read the first 1 or 2 pages of every article, and that shapes your thinking. That is absolutely wrong. Remember, research is not there for, you're not doing research just to get a degree. You're doing research to gain knowledge that will change you as a human and will change how you act or interact with the environment around you, and hopefully transform society in this process. But the mere misuse of certain tools like AI or the misappropriation of knowledge that's available can lead to you being either expelled, not being able to finish a degree, not getting the mark you deserve, or you would have rather have wanted. There are tools available where one can use to check on a number of these things. Your scholarly reputation is actually your identity in this academic environment, meaning that if you want to go forward in academic environment, your scholarly reputation needs to be solid from the start, from undergrad level. Even to date, when I know certain people are coming for interviews for jobs, for instance, I go and read their masters or their doctoral degree theses, for instance, to get a sense of the person, to get a sense of the quality of person. And out there in the real world, that's what people do. Remember that your research is not limited to roads. Your research output is available for scrutiny, not just by the discipline-specific environment, but across the world, by laymen, by interviewers, by HR, you name it. It's out there for people to read and assess you based on your research output. Now, there's also part of the ecosystem, there's other role players, there's publishers, there's the editorial, editors, the editorial work that's being done, the reviewers. They also have to maintain a reputation, and I'll show you later on how quickly a reputation can be tarnished. Currently, Elsevier is under fire. Elsevier, who is seen as the or one of the top publishers in the world, is now under fire for having produced questionable science. And they don't produce it, remember, they facilitate the scholarly communication. So what is your role then in the ecosystem when it comes to reputation? Because your reputation might be on the line, but if you create falsified findings and you publish this, etc., the publisher, their reputation is on the line. And we've seen instances where people are sued by the publishers. We've also seen other cases, but I'll show you where to look for those. And even within a library, where you find your information, we also have a role to play when it comes to scholarly integrity. And I'll explain that in a bit more detail. Bottom line is the scholarship is built on trust and credibility. Research integrity protects your academic reputation and then shares reliable knowledge. Now, you live in an era which I'm very happy to say I'm not really part of in terms of doing research at your level, whereby to identify what is false versus what's true is such a difficult task. And I feel sorry for the people who's going to deal with this all the time. We know there's a checklist you can follow, but even that does not guarantee that that output is actually 100% reliable. And remember that ethical scholarship is intended to benefit society. So unethical scholarship will lead to negative impact on our society as well. So, coming back to what is scholarly integrity, it's about honesty, it's about transparency, accountability, it's also about respect for intellectual property, and this goes into copyright, etc. And it's also the ethical research conduct. Now, Rhodes is a well-established institution when it comes to research conduct. We have our process in place, we have our ethics clearance. From the start, the requirement is that you have to conduct yourself in an ethical manner, right up to the finish line. The finish line being some kind of output that you work towards. Academic writing and plagiarism. We focus on the first aspect. What is plagiarism? I'm sure you already had a session on plagiarism, but the bottom line is this is one of those things that's unintended quite often, but the consequences are extremely severe. If you plagiarize, whether you intend it or not, the consequences are really bad, very serious. Plagiarism constitutes copying text without citation, paraphrasing without acknowledgement, using ideas without credit, and submitting someone else's work. Think about it. This is actually comes down to theft. And this is why I say that you have to consider intellectual property rights of other people. If you take somebody else's idea and you put it as your own, that's theft. And it has serious consequences in terms of you, again, either getting expelled or your research being dismissed or something like that. And you have to restart. We've had cases where people have worked years and years doing research just to find that something small like an incorrect citation can lead to the whole research being nullified. So what does a citation represent then? When it comes to, I mean, you've all learned how to reference. Now you understand why it's important to reference. The referencing is not there for your supervisor or your research assistant, etc., to see that you've read all of these materials, 20, 30, 50, or hundreds, depending on your research output. It is a case of those citations represent the knowledge entities that you considered as part of your study, that you used to create this research output. So your citation and referencing management has to be 100% accurate. This includes obviously looking at the quality, the accuracy, and the consistency of your citation. So reference management is a critical skill, and you use it in the business world as well. It's not limited to academic environment. It's used all over. People need to know, where did you find the information, whose idea was this, etc. And especially when it comes to negating certain research, where you also have to consistently cite accurately, even though you don't agree necessarily or you disprove somebody else's work. So one of the challenges when it comes to citation is, what do I cite? Now you come into a library, you would go online, or you sit in your office, you would go online, and you will find a bunch of journals that you, books, online books, or etc. The list goes on. Now, Rhodes subscribes to about 56,000 journals, which is not a massive number. It sounds massive in terms of 56,000, but it doesn't cover all the journals that's being produced in the world. And those journals represent research output that's supposedly of quality, right? So you have to learn in terms of, how do I make a decision? And it's not just about the decision. This decision is not limited to whether I want to publish or not. This decision is actually already, during your research, whether you're going to cite it or not, whether it influences your thinking or not. That's what that citation represents. So you have to learn a new skill, and that skill is, how do I distinguish between what's scholarly and what's not scholarly? Now, immediately you say, well, yes, we know Wikipedia might not be scholarly, but it's a good start. A lot of what you find on Google Scholar even, it's not scholarly necessarily. What is meant by scholarly? Scholarly means it literally went through a process of academic integrity at all steps, creating this research output. But how do you then identify those resources? We're also going to look at some of the evaluation, and I'm going to show you a complete checklist afterwards, whereby you can look for instance, well, first thing is, has this item been peer reviewed? If something has not gone through a peer review process, you can already start questioning its validity and reliability. The reason for peer review is whether it is agreement in terms of quality, and in terms of the process followed, in terms of your specialist in the field agreeing with what you've discovered or what you've written about. They are the specialists. Now, predatory journals, I don't like the word predatory because predatory says there's a sort of a binary approach. Either something is problematic or it's not. However, scholarly publications doesn't work that way. There's a lot of bad science and very good journals. There's some excellent academic outputs in very bad journals. Bad, which I'll get to. I'll show you the continuum that we talk about. Also, part of evaluating of your resources, we have to check for reliability of the resource. The research integrity risks that we face, some of the major risks, fabrication. And maybe at this point I can show you one of the, and I'm just going to escape here for a second. And I'm going to show you today's news on Retraction Watch. A researcher in Nigeria called Hitler Louis, he wrapped up, he just actually broke the record. He had 35 retractions in just 24 months because he fabricated his findings. He fabricated the data set. His reputation is gone. He will not get a job again at an academic institution or a research institution. In fact, I don't know where he will find a job again, because even teaching or wherever, people are going to question and say, well, your integrity as a human, not just as a researcher, as a human can be questioned. Now, Retraction Watch have more than 68,000 journal articles that's been retracted, and they've been retracted from very well-established publishers, as well as some questionable publishers. But you will see Elsevier, Taylor Francis, and the list goes on. You'll see them on this list. So as a researcher, one of the things you have to look at is, if I want to cite for this article, how do I know it hasn't been retracted? There are ways. I think there's, one of the sessions is using one of our tools called LibKey. LibKey will indicate immediately whether something has been retracted. So that's another important session to actually come to. So I just want to get back to the presentation. Fabrication, falsification. Quite often people will falsify information to prove their point, or to seem like, oh, this is really a niche area, this is a new discovery, etc. But they falsified the content. There's also misrepresentation in terms of, as one of the risks. Right. This is some more examples where we have problems. There's things called citation cartels, whereby there's an agreement between publishers that they will cite each other, therefore prop up their academic standing, or as publishers, etc. Now, these behaviors are completely wrong in terms of our research integrity processes. Certain universities are being questioned. Can you imagine, like in the top right, you'll see Saudi University Dean, the Dean has 20 retractions in 2 years. Do I want to go and study at this university if the dean has 20 retractions in 2 years? So it's not just your reputation, the institutional reputation, and your national research reputation as a country. What you're standing as a country. Here's an economist, for instance, bottom right. We also had to retract the paper because the economists, people we trust, people we see in the news, people that guides our national policies and development, mess with the data, create a false impression. Also, we had to retract it, but the damage is way beyond just this. We are experiencing an absolute crisis when it comes to misinformation, and more so because a lot of us use AI tools. That alone is a session on its own in terms of AI and research and how it creates false narratives, how it creates false positives. I don't know what else you want to call it. I call it epistemicide because it's actually the murder of knowledge in many ways. Can we reproduce research? What is credible and what's not? And we need to ensure that from an institutional perspective, but also from a broader discipline or research environment, that there's trust, there's faith in our research. Whether it's just the everyday man on the street, believing that our research is valid or not because there's an impact on the community or other entities. You can imagine if we now produce research that's questionable, will we get funding from the government, for instance? Will other institutions work with us, etc.? So this is really a key element to your research. Your research has to be credible, it has to be reproducible, it has to be valid, and it has to be expressed in a way that the institution agreed to. As a start, one of the things I can say is to avoid questionable sciences, first thing you do is read beyond requisite material. Read way beyond. Don't just focus on that specific area and read beyond it so you can get a broad, holistic view of the discipline in context of the larger context. Please read beyond the first page of materials retrieved. That's also another challenge. People read the abstract, or they read at the first page, or they push it through an AI tool and say, give me a summary. You've missed the point of that research paper. Contemplate the different approaches and arguments. This has also happened, especially with arguments, where there's debates and where there's an argument against a certain point of view, for instance. Yet, because of not reading the full context, it's seen as supporting through that article instead of being negated by the research undertaken. So what's questionable science versus legitimate science? Questionable science, it's about best practices. As I said, integrity. All the practices and roads, and this is something that's really enforced at Rhodes University, is that all steps in the research process is checked for best practice. Your supervisor's role as a postgraduate, in your postgraduate studies, would be to check that you are adhering to the best practices, and not just in terms of wanting to produce something. A lot of science is invalidated because of unethical behavior, and I've already mentioned this. So then, what's the types of questionable science? Well, articles in predatory would be so-called predatory journals, retracted research. Unidentified bad science. Now, this is difficult because how do you identify bad science? Well, you have to go through a process of assessing your research, assessing your resources, which I will speak to as well. We also get weak or low quality science. So this is important when it comes to the impact factor of a journal, because that's indicative, not just of the rigor, but also in terms of whether this is weak or low science. Nature, for instance, as a journal, rejects about 98 to 99% of journals submitted to them. Sorry, articles, manuscripts submitted to them. And so it's a really high level journal taking only the best. So that's one of the ways to identify what's bad versus what's good, or what's weak versus and what's low quality, for instance. Also falsified science, obviously, and there's also other unethical behaviors. And Samuel Samango, the other senior manager, will speak to this. This is research data management, practices regarding research data management, ethical research data management processes that will be becoming part of the ethical clearance processes at Rhodes hopefully soon. So we've spoken about what's bad science, questionable science. On the other hand, what is the legitimate science? Legitimate science, good quality science. It's really about adhering to best practices at a researcher level first and foremost, at the researcher level. Then secondly, at the institutional level. Thirdly, the publisher level. Then the editorial processes. And then at the dissemination level. Now you can see how the whole ecosystem contributes to whether something is legitimate or not. So, coming back to what I said earlier on, why I prefer not to use the word predatory journals, because some journals might be predatory, but they are indexed in indices like Web of Science or Scopus. Some journals are incredibly high quality, but they're not indexed, as is for instance, our Journal of Community Engagement, for instance. So there's a continuum and a number of factors you have to consider. And part of this continuum is going from the left, really questionable, fake, etc., moving towards the right. It's not binary, it's a case of where on this continuum does this output fall, will I be using it or not to inform my research. So on the far end, you've got the exploited. The far left, you've got really the exploitation of research, and you see this very much in predatory, peer predatory publishers. And right on the far right, you see the ethical scholar, the experienced ethical scholar. So that's another way of determining something is good or bad science, is speak to your supervisor or speak to your librarian. That's part of our services that we also render. Consider the source. Now, what determines, sorry, let me rephrase. When we talk about due diligence or scholarly process, what does it actually mean? It means that if you followed all aspects of due diligence, your results will be accurate, results will be reliable, and it will be valid. Those are the three key elements of quality research. And that's unfortunately under attack. I've already mentioned this, hijacked. You can hijack journals as well, so be very careful. You think, for instance, let's take Nature again. What happens if somebody else sets up a journal called Nature? They can quite easily online. This is what I called hijack journals. So make sure you're really looking at the original and the correct version of a journal. We've had a number of South African journals being hijacked as well. At times you get a whole editorial board being hijacked, or not physically, fortunately, but through the scholarly processes. Another aspect, for instance, where it's questionable is where you'll find an editorial board being listed. But if you ask those people that's listed on the editorial board whether they actually editors of this journal, they say they've never heard of the journal. So that's editorial hijacking, for instance. Now, we endorse a list of resources as a library. It doesn't mean that you can trust everything that comes from the library. It means that this has gone through some type of assessment. And your role is now to take it further as a scholar and look at its reputation. There are areas of concern. There's also a lot of citation pollution. So when you do cite journal articles, go one back in terms of that journal article has also cited a number of journal articles. So directly, you might not have retracted material in your first generation of output, but in the second generation, you might have retracted material that influenced or damaged the quality of the first generation output. So go back all the way when it comes to citations and checking for validity and reliability of those outputs. Also, even question those journals that's made accessible by the library. As I said, we've got 56,000 subscriptions, journal subscriptions at Rhodes. We've got thousands of ebooks, etc. And there's no way we can actually assess all of them. We assess on a number of factors that determine our acquisitions, that's determined by acquisitions policy. But it doesn't mean just because the library has made it accessible that it is absolute quality and you can go ahead and cite it without doing your due diligence. Follow due diligence and check every resource. And what we have done, we have created a checklist. I don't think you've seen this. This journal checklist is a guide that helps you to make a decision when it comes to quality of journals. This includes the journal's reputation and standing. So a number of things you have to consider, like, for instance, its web presence. What does it look like? Spelling on its website. And there's a number of things. You can work through this. Does it have an ISSN or EISSN? Does it work with digital object identifiers? Those are all indicators that will help you to make a decision, just in terms of a journal's reputation and standing. Second one is journal affiliation. Which scholarly entities or societies endorse that output? So, for instance, I would rather have a medical, I'd rather use a medical journal that's been endorsed by a medical entity, preferably an NGO, and not a massive pharmaceutical company that can also, unfortunately, dictate where research is leading. And quite often you'll find, especially in the medical sciences, pharmaceutical companies, I think, had quite a bad, or getting into trouble for paying to have certain outputs produced. That's also questionable. So another aspect is looking at code or ASPR, or looking at QAJ or EASE or WAM. All of those entities consider a journal before they index, and COPE specifically, Committee on Publications and Ethics. So Rhodes is also Rhodes University in terms of our outputs. We don't belong to COPE yet. We hope to reach that, meaning that we promise basically that we are going to produce quality by the journals that we publish. And there's a whole list of things you have to adhere to from the COPE side. Look at the peer review policy and processes that's followed by the journal. Is it double-blind peer review? Who owns it? For instance, the South African accreditation process also considers facts like not all of your reviewers should be at the same institution, or not, no more than 2/3 of the research outputs can be within a specific journal, and things like that. It's actually quite interesting. But then looking at the editorial boards, who is member of the editorial boards? Are they clearly stated? Who are they when it comes to discipline standing? Are they really the specialists in the area? There's also the publication processes. Quite often questionable science outputs. Yeah, I only have one picture. Yeah, so I do. This is on the LibGuide. So you'll find this on the Scholarly Communications LibGuide. I'm sorry, I only have the first page. I didn't put all the pages. So part of the publication process is that you have to consider who is the publisher and have they asked you to pay an APC. Now, there's also the question about, well, if I have to pay to have something published, is that a good practice or bad practice? That's still under discussion because APCs at this point also means that you don't have to subscribe to an item. The cost is redirected to the author. However, that brings its own set of challenges with it. Another aspect is that you can consider, for instance, the owns of copyright of the material, the output. One of the major things you can look at is where is this item, this journal indexed? However, as I said, you'll find questionable science index analysis of Scopus and in Clarivate's Web of Science. However, they've gone through quite a rigorous assessment over the past 2-3 years, and they've removed a number of journal titles from their indices, and discontinued indexing them. There's also administrative and technical transparency that you can consider. There's a whole checklist. You can work through all of these. This website, correspondence. If you get correspondence from a journal that says, please publish with us, and there's spelling mistakes in the email itself, then I definitely would not consider publishing with that outlet. There's also the professional look and feel when it comes to the website and the correspondence. And for the most part, I can tell you that journals of good reputation do not send emails saying, please publish with us. They don't do it. They don't need to do it. In fact, they turn away vast numbers of manuscripts submitted to them. Then there's also other things like useful tools to think about. Think, check, submit, which is a nice checklist. Cabell's International, unfortunately, is behind the paywall. Beale's list has been removed. It forms the basis of Cabell's at this point in time. Then also look at things like DIJ delisted titles. However, there might be very good reason for something being delisted, especially from DIJ. DIJ, Directory of Open Access Journals. If a journal has moved from open access to being behind the paywall, it doesn't mean it's bad quality. Just because it's been delisted, it just means it doesn't meet the requirement as an open access journal anymore. So think about those aspects as well. There's also publishing things, Quake Watch, and the list goes on, that you can work through to determine whether journals are good quality or not. And remember, when, as I said earlier on, why do you want to know this? Because you want to know, you want to feel comfortable knowing that you have full trust in the article that you are citing for research, not just where you want to publish, but also what you want to include as part of the research process. Right, and you'll find this checklist on the lab cards. Right. Now, I've already spoken about the library's role in this because we are one of the partners, one of the stakeholders in the ecosystem. One of the things we need to understand is, why do researchers cite what they cite? We're talking about information behaviors. Information behaviors can allow us to also support or change our services to ensure there's scholarly rigor in not just what is being, not just in the citation itself, but in terms of why are you citing this, what you're thinking behind it. Referencing tools, which we make available. We also, one of the things I would very much like our librarians to do is to assist and work through your references to see the quality of those references at least. And to look at articles, preferably pre-publication, and to also assist with your due diligence process. All right. The question is, with publishers, is the library involved? And at least at Rhodes, yes, we are involved with those journals that we publish as an institution. And well, not those that's published by Taylor Francis, for instance, or one of the other big publishers, but we have a fully functional support base for journals being published at Rhodes. And we also consider things as the metadata quality and things that go that's associated with the research output. Publishers, there's a whole list. I'm not going to go through the publisher, but publishers also have to protect their reputation. So they will check what's being submitted to them, and they will check for clarity. They will check for correctness, completeness. So basically, what they check for is, have you been honest in your research conduct? And is this worth publishing or not? Then there's also publishers' action lists, whereby there's list compilers. List compilers, for instance, will include your entities that index materials. They create lists. Societies create lists. For instance, in America, you'll have the Optometrist Society. I can't remember what it's called. As a practitioner society, providing a list of journals that's preferred in their discipline. So also trying to find those societies and what they put out. I'm going to skip the publisher's action list. Now, one thing that's very important is the use of AI in research. AI is a really incredible tool to use, but it can also be an incredibly dangerous tool to use in research. So what's the ethical behavior when it comes to artificial intelligence tools? Rhodes's approach is that it's used, AI is viewed as a learning support tool, learning research tool, learning and research tool, apologies. In as much as Grammarly or other applications that you might find, it can help you in your research, but do not limit your research to that tool. AI does not replace critical thinking, and we often say is, please do not outsource your thinking to a tool. AI is also very much biased. The language models behind AI is biased in terms of what's accessible, what's online, and that often means it excludes a vast amount of outputs that's not included in the knowledge base. So Rhodes provides guidance for students and lecturers on the responsible use of AI, specifically generative AI more than anything else, I think. And it's really focusing on using the tool, but ensuring academic integrity and scholarly standards are met at all times. Core principles: ethical and transparent use of AI. I'm standing in front of the screen, I apologize. And here's another interesting habit that you have to get into as part of your information behaviors is when you use AI, state it in your research output. So you have to acknowledge that you've used AI tools, but at the same time, what have you used it for? If you want to look at an extremely good example how this works, you can look at Northwest University. They've got incredible policy, and also Angelisa Press. Also, quite recently, I was part of a group for them that focused on how do you explain the use of AI in your research, and how do you stipulate that in your research output. Also consider AI, one of the dangers is privacy. We have to consider the fact that we have to protect data privacy and intellectual property. So when you upload a file or something like that, know that it might say, oh, your data will not be used for the learning module. Do you trust that or not? It's open for discussion. AI does not replace thinking and your research processes, so there has to be complete oversight, human oversight. AI cannot interpret certain things. AI cannot interpret, for instance, humor or certain context, certain words in a specific context. So there always has to be human oversight. As a student, as a scholar, your responsibility is that you have to comply with your course and assessment rules. You might also be restricted or prohibited from using AI in certain environments. And also you have to declare that you've used AI at all times. So this has just been a very short overview of three critical areas of scholarly integrity, looking at ethical behaviors pertaining to research outputs and what's expected. There's a lot more to this, but I believe we've got many workshops that will speak to in detail to things like how do you manage your citations, or how do you assess the journal as part of your rigor and your outputs process. So thank you. I'm not sure if there's any questions. There's so I just want to see the question on the chat. All right. This is really good. And I can talk to this as well. So there's a number of indices: Web of Science, IBSS, DHIT, the Norwegian list. Remember, Norwegian list has got 3 levels. So again, as part of the accreditation process, it's in the South African DHIT environment, they would, for instance, I think that it's level 2 Norwegian list, something from the Humanities Citation Index, Web of Science. Not all accredited indices are included in the DHIT list, for instance. Now, this comes back to questions often asked about, funding. The reason why you want to actually, the reason why you want to submit your manuscript to an accredited, a DHIT accredited title is because there's funding involved as well from the government for these outputs, only if they go into an accredited output. At the same time, also when your research is being funded by a third party, for instance, especially NRF, National Research Foundation, there's a requirement for certain things, and one of them would be is that trying to put this into an accredited title. The accreditation really means that we acknowledge this as a quality output, a trusted publisher, trust journal, for instance. So you have your academic publishing processes, also the NRF statement on open access, etc. There's so many things to consider, and what I've given you today is just really in a nutshell. Thank you very much. All right, I'm just going to switch off the. Let's see if there's anything else. Great. Now, thank you for the feedback. I really appreciate it. All right. Now, thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.